So I was like, yeah, I locked him in the trunk and threw him off the bridge. What of it? Oh, he's coming.
Dear Mom and Dad, first of all, fuck you for giving birth to me. Second of all, fuck you for naming me Worst Guy Ever. That was a real cunt move. I have an extensive list of grievances again this week, but at the same time, I'm gonna skip to the worst one. I recently watched a very upsetting anime that you failed to mentally shield me from, which I remind you is your court-ordered duty. You know that my constitution is weakened by my affluenza, which, I remind you, is a totally real, not made-up disease, and it's time you started taking it fucking seriously. Therefore, I'm afraid I'll be taking you fuckers in front of the judge again. Another 50 grand or so should help you mentally recover. A bit. You'll be hearing from my attorney soon. With love, Worst Guy Ever. And send.
Welcome to WIAGW!
It's my head, Schwartz. It's my head. I will see you in court.
Greetings, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to Why I'm a Genius Weekly. And of course, thank you to the folks applying that wonderful #WIAGW noise. Why don't you send yours in now? Surely, it will only be a week until we hear it. Yes, WIAGW is back from the wide world of smash meme videos to talk about a subject, that the world's on fire about. At least it was several months ago while people still gave a shit. Yes, that's right, I'm talking about Goblin Slayer, the world-renowned anime, manga, light novel that is currently causing a bit of a shitstorm. Specifically, that had to do with episode 1 of Goblin Slayer that a lot of people took issue with for reasons we will get into later. Video upon video upon video talking about how this show is problematic. And despite what you may think of me, I have a slightly more nuanced view of this than you might think. For you see, I am in fact the world's biggest fan of Goblin Slayer. I am a devout fan of the manga. I have read the spin-off, Goblin Slayer Year 1. I've read a little bit of the light novel, and now I've watched every episode of the anime, and at the time of filming this, that is 7 episodes.
God, now there's like 11 episodes out. What the hell have I been doing?
So, unlike everybody jumping up to talk about episode 1 of the anime, I have a bit more context, which actually is a strength and a weakness, because it makes me a little bit unable to judge the impression people have of watching episode 1 of, to them, a new story and reacting as they did. So let's keep my biases in mind, shall we? But for the uninitiated, what the flip even is a Goblin Slayer-san? Goblin Slayer is a dark fantasy story about a man driven to slay goblins. After subverting our expectations in episode 1, Goblin Slayer goes on to be a very grim fantasy in which we depict Goblin Slayer kind of being the fantasy version of the Doom guy, going on to just kill goblins, despite the fact that there are much higher glories than an adventurer in this world can obtain. Because this world is largely based on tabletop RPGs such as Dungeons and Dragons. And while the higher level warriors and warlocks go on to slay dragons and destroy demons, Goblin Slayer only has a passion for killing goblins. And the reasons are complicated, but essentially he's got a personal grudge that makes him take them seriously and want every last one exterminated. There's a supporting cast including a priestess who was saved by Goblin Slayer, as well as a bunch of fairy bullshit people who are pretty cool in their own right. And as I said, I am the #1 fan of Goblin Slayer in the world. But I should preface this whole discussion by saying the manga is way better than the anime. It's true. I've made a whole video on about how manga is better than anime, and let me tell you, that applies in spades to this adaptation as well. You got CG Goblin Slayer, you got those kind of panning shots, you've got a distinct decrease in the amount of fleshing out some scenes get, and just general hokey animation a lot of the time. The manga is like beautiful moment to moment. You get everything that you get from the anime. You know, I'll admit, I love the opening theme song to Goblin Slayer. It's melancholy, it's moody, and it really gets me fucking hyped to watch goblins die by the hundreds. And you get the general benefits you get with an anime. The manga is way better, that's the point. Which might be surprising to some people because the manga is actually far more graphic than the anime. Although there is an argument to be made that animation is inherently more graphic because you see motion and there's sound effects, but we won't get into that right now. The thing about the anime though that I'll just get out of the way right now is that it's pretty good. It's an adaptation of the manga that touches most of the important notes. I suspect some things are being jumbled around, like the big farm raid. I suspect it's coming at the end of season 1 here to be kind of the climax. But overall, I'm just gonna give you the short version. I recommend this anime because it's an adaptation of the great story that is Goblin Slayer. So there's your cutoff point if you want to get out right now. Here's the deal, people. Why do I like Goblin Slayer? Because I've seen a lot of people reacting to how upset they were by the anime episode 1. And I'll tell ya, Goblin Slayer doesn't really get that good in episode 1 or chapter 1 of the manga. It takes time to build to it. And I am deep in there. I'm up its ass. And I know everything that there is good about Goblin Slayer. So let's talk about that, shall we? There's so much to say about why Goblin Slayer is good and why it's probably one of my favorite series running right now that I read regularly. And I tweeted about this, I don't know, maybe over a year ago about my deep love of the series, so you know that I'm not bullshitting you. Goblin Slayer can be funny at times, it can be dramatic a lot of the time, but most importantly, the example of Goblin Slayer is a character I connect with on a deep level. There are certain characters that exhibit traits that just makes me real attracted to him, you know? And Goblin Slayer's appeal, the qualities that make him great are his autistic level of obsession with killing goblins in strategically brilliant ways. And this is all highlighted in episode 1 and then just taken to extremes in other situations. When the characters in episode 1 just rush into the Goblin's nest with no information, thinking that they have the upper hand and they'll easily be able to dispatch the worthless, pathetic goblins as they're the lowest mob type in the world, grim reality comes crashing down when they realize that they're not as smart as they thought, and goblins, while not brilliant and have the minds of children and the bodies of small children, can be more crafty with those tools than they expected. And so, of course, they all fucking die horribly. Well, most. Others meet other tragic fate. But we'll get to that later. While you've got our characters thinking about, oh, you know, fairy tales about being a hero, being a grand, glorious master, and already talking about slaying dragons when they haven't even killed a single fucking goblin yet. On the other hand, you've got Goblin Slayer, who coldly, tactically analyzes every time he's going to kill a single goblin, determines what the best path is and the most likely path to succeed will be, and executes it coldly, calculatedly, and without making mistakes. Because he doesn't have an ego. He doesn't assume that he'll just blunder through life and get by okay, like he's a fantasy RPG character, which largely is the point of the character. Goblin Slayer is Doomguy in a world of JRPG madness, which a lot of people have said, but I just want to restate for the record here. But that really only applies to the new adventurers. You can see with the older people in the Adventurers Guild, they know what's up. So you can feel the experience. It's the experience, people, more than just the, you know, heroic destiny that helps people survive these things. And Goblin Slayer is the pinnacle of that. He's the Batman of the fucking fantasy world, and he's always fucking prepared. People die in caves all the time of getting poisoned, so the man brings antidotes. He knows that goblins can see in the dark, but that he can't, so he trains himself to be able to make up for that by being able to fight in darkness. He's aware of all the signs that tell you when a higher level goblin is around. Be it a hobgoblin, a shaman, a champion goblin, or a lord goblin, the man is always on the lookout for signs that he's getting himself in over his head, and he avoids getting into that situation. He will never go into a goblin's den unless absolutely necessary, and prefers to smoke him out, flood him out, crush him in an avalanche, whatever is necessary to get the job done, he does. He's not in it for the glory, he's in it to kill fucking goblins. All of them. Because they deserve it. I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about the other party members because they pretty much just prove themselves to be reliable tacticians who work well with their abilities and serve as sort of tools for Goblin Slayer to control in any given situation. And they juxtapose the naive, foolish people who don't plan ahead and don't creatively use their weapons and abilities in order to survive any given situation. They just flounder around and assume it'll be fine. No, that's not how real teamwork works. Goblin Slayer is like a Navy SEAL leader. He analyzes the situation, he knows the tools he has at hand, he minimizes risk, and he executes every action effectively and efficiently. The priestess is really the one party member who's worth discussing because she's one of the naive rookies in episode 1. Her whole party gets wiped and she only gets an arrow to the shoulder and makes it out alive. She is the vehicle through which we see a rookie growing, gaining experience, and learning how to deal with this world. And everything I've been describing is basically the initial deception of Goblin Slayer, where where the world is set up to at first make you think that it's going to be just, some fairy, fluffy, blah, blah bullshit fantasy world where everything's fine and nothing grim happens, and then you immediately get that contradiction. You're brought into reality real quick, just like the characters are, by seeing their friends and family die before them. All right? It's tragic, it's horrific, but our experience mirrors what the characters are going through. And there are many things I love about Goblin Slayer. The art can be absolutely magnifico at times, like this bad boy right here. It's a masterpiece. The red eye glowing motif that always happens to Goblin Slayer is just so fucking badass. It's so fucking man literally too angry to die. But let's not get carried away here. Nothing that happens in Goblin Slayer doesn't fit the laws of the series. Because really, at its heart, what is Goblin Slayer about? The creation story for the world of Goblin Slayer involves the gods rolling dice and just playing games of chance, then creating the humans and other races, elves, dwarves, etc., for their amusement. This is a metaphor for character creation in a role-playing game. They're all pawns created by the gods, specifically for their amusement. Same goes for the whole damn world. In this world, Goblin Slayer is inserted. In my humble opinion, I might be reading ahead in the story a little bit, and again, I have not read the light novel, so I'm way behind. I'm only as far as the fucking manga. I feel that there are hints that the idea will be that Goblin Slayer will be one to defy causality, to defy the gods that created him, and using only his wits and willpower, overcome the destiny that was set out for him and his people. And frankly, just be the best fucking dude ever, who's killing some damn goblins. This is implied when there's dice rolling metaphors in the actions that Goblin Slayer has done, like the time that he was almost killed. The metaphor of dice rolling and always being one bad roll away from death, just like in a bad D&D campaign when you roll a 1 and instantly kill yourself. I believe that there's a point being made here that Goblin Slayer doesn't adhere to that system. He's not a D&D player character of a level 1 fighter rushing into a combat zone with 8 goblins surrounding him and trying to use his feats and just cleave them all dead or any of that bullshit. Oh, I took cleave and great cleave. That means I can dispatch all the goblins at once. How many fucking D&D players have tried this shit and they get killed every time? That fantasy is brought more into grim reality by its depiction in the anime, manga, etc. That's the damn point.
And I'm not trying to say there's anything unique or special to Goblin Slayer, that he isn't literally tied into the same mechanics that the rest of the world appears to operate on. No, it's that despite being part of that, he rises above it with creativity. There's a reason that he's a silver-ranked member of the guild despite using mundane equipment and weapons. What separates him is that noodle, not magic powers.
Goblin Slayer is more like the D&D player who takes the time, analyzes his spells and abilities, and thinks outside the box and creatively sets up traps to destroy enemies in interesting and unique ways. Which is cool, I like those things, but I feel there's a larger point being made about how Goblin Slayer just will not play along with what the system expects him to do. There's a metaphor happening here about defying causality, and about rising above the role that was set for you at birth, be it by gods or men. Because who would have expected a fighter-ranger hybrid to come up with an idea to use a fucking scroll of warp to warp the way overpowered demon that would have fucking killed these guys to the bottom of the ocean to be sliced in half by the water pressure? When all his friends were defeated, when the entire party was on the edge of destruction, even after valiantly using their abilities in intelligent ways to be able to survive the initial onslaught of magic from the thing, it was his innovative, creative thinking that got him out of that situation and is going to be what brings him up from the shackles of causality into the freedom to make his own decisions in the world, aka fucking survive, and hopefully kill all the fucking goblins. That's what I give a shit about, right? The way he does it is fucking cool, but it's about the point that's being made. It's about how Orcbold will not be held back. He will find ways to survive and achieve, and by Christ, that's what I love about the man. He's only a mere man, but he uses the tools at his disposal to achieve his goals. A fucking good example being set for all of us. Which is why I stridently believe the best character to compare Goblin Slayer to is absolutely Guts from Berserk, whose entire character arc is about defying causality himself. I feel that is exactly the metaphor that is being gotten at with Goblin Slayer, and there's a heck of a lot of similarities in the events that happens between the two series to boot. That's why I like Goblin Slayer, motherfuckers. That's why. Now, all that being said, I understand that some people have some criticisms of this show. Let's jump right the fuck into it, shall we, ladies and gentlemen? Let's talk about rape. There's a unique feature of the Goblins and Goblin Slayer that I've never heard of in any of the series I've read, and I've read quite a bit of fantasy in my day. The Goblins and Goblin Slayer are an all-male race that can only propagate themselves by kidnapping the females of other species and raping them to produce their offspring. As you might expect, they don't have a lot of respect for the women they do this to, and so they murder, massacre, devour, they kill them. They kill them. The whole thing is massively horrific and a great motivator to kill them all, I would say. Now let's just look at the face of it. First of all, what's the point of giving this trait to these goblins? I think it's pretty clear. It's to make them more evil seeming, right? It's so that they are doing a terrible thing that our heroes, especially Goblin Slayer, wants to make them stop doing because, spoiler alert, Orc Bold had something similar happen to a woman he loved in his past. He was powerless to stop it, and now he's on the crusade to make up for it by killing them all. Let's go a little bit deeper though, okay? Because, there's been quite a bit of criticism that's been brought up against the show, and I'd specifically like to call out two sort of competing videos that I watched that were, in my opinion, the most interesting. One is Jeff Thu's video, Mother's Basement, where he talked about his criticism of this depiction of this stuff in the show, and there's also Gigix's video. I thought that both of these were interesting and showed the dichotomy of thinking when it comes to this stuff. I'd recommend watching both these videos. Is it possible that our fair author was getting at a bit more when it comes to this stuff? Was there more than just depicting violence to make us hate the person perpetrating it? In the light novel originally, it's true, I read through the scene and it's not particularly graphic, you know? There's depictions of people dying, it's pretty easy to desensitize yourself from that thing, and there's no shenanigans going on there. Yes, it's certainly implied that rape is happening, but not much is discussed. You know, we're talking about text, so I can't say shown, not much is said. In the manga and the anime, however, quite a bit more is depicted. As you can see, we're getting into some pretty big old nudity going on here before this character gets raped by goblins. And in the anime, as you can see, there's also quite a bit of flesh shown here as well. Now, let me just check my reference images. I think I had one for this. Here we go. No, not that one. That's the one. See, this is the message. Remember, people, rape is not okay. Don't forget that. And I understand people's anger at these scenes. There's a feeling that what the manga and anime are doing is they're kind of bringing in sexual titillation by showing the nudity of these characters, and that's watering down the scene, that's downplaying the horror that's being depicted here and making us, I don't know, distracted by sexuality, I guess. I get this criticism. I do. And any person who says that they feel this way, I believe them. It just makes me think, you know? There's a lot of anime that's depicted things way worse than this. I mean, I would argue it's kind of a central part of anime culture in general, showing things that are taboo. I mean, just to name the most famous one, how about the rape of Casca in Berserk? That's, I think, a pretty damn good parallel to what's going on here. Now, here's where we come to the clash, right? Because the big buzz was about episode 1 of the anime, specifically dealing with this scene as an introduction to the series, right? So Jeff's video, for one, was arguing that this scene made a very poor introduction to the series and scared people off. And because of that, less people are going to want to watch the show, it's going to get less support, less viewers, etc., etc. And for that reason, why not just remove something like this? Because, accurately, it is not what the show is about. To remove it would not hurt the main core narrative, right? This is something that could happen off screen, or to take this to the extreme, you could argue why not rewrite the goblins in an adaptation to have them not be rapists and, you know, reproduce with females. He didn't argue that. I'm just putting that out myself as that's one thing that you could do. And it seemed to me that Gigix's video was sort of making the opposite point. It was more of a, well, can we really judge an anime based on one episode? The inclusion of this kind of a scene, does it really cripple your enjoyment of the show? Why not just not watch it if you don't like it and leave it to those who don't mind it and are able to get through it? There's many shows that depict bad things that happen like this, sexual violence, all kinds of stuff. Why are we gonna make a case that it needs to be removed now? And here's where I see something interesting to comment on. I feel that there is a big clash of values going on. On the one hand, you've got people who see anime and they want as many people to watch it as possible. And it's absolutely a fact that there's many people out there who have been victims of sexual violence, and they might be upset by scenes like this in a show and turned off and not want to watch more. And isn't that a damn shame? Because it would be so easy to just cut something like that out. This point of view makes sense to me, especially if you perhaps have an affiliate link with Crunchyroll and it's in your best interest to get as many people signed up as possible. And no, I'm not trying to attack anyone with that point. I'm just saying that's a real psychological motivating factor, subconsciously or not. Then you can contrast that with someone like me, an elitist asshole. I'm happy to speak up for those of us who really don't mind having filters that destroy people's interest in something such that it'll appear to a more niche group of people. I have no problem with that at all. Same reason I advocate for hardness in games. I don't want everyone to be able to beat every game, and I don't want everyone to necessarily like every single show. Doesn't that just sound like a ironing out of the wrinkles? Remember, that was a bad thing. I mean, what am I gonna do? Am I gonna go to a woman's clothing store and say, hey, what the fuck? You people aren't catering to, 49% of the population? That's some bullshit. Sexist, get the flip out of here. Sometimes you appeal to a small segment of the population, because a lot of time, those people give way more of a shit than everybody would if that same product were for everybody. And on another note, there's something that I personally am just really turned off by with this idea of modifying or watering down a creator's vision for our benefit, because I just don't like being involved in the artistic process. Let me just spell out, here's what I'm for. Here's the process I like. Show gets made, manga gets drawn, light novel gets written, it gets released to the public, and then we say we like it or we don't, and that influences what happens from there. This person thinks, oh, I guess people don't like that. Maybe my next story won't include these particular things that people didn't like. But I want those people to have the freedom to say, well, you know what? Fuck the people who didn't like this. I'm gonna keep including it in my story because, I don't know, maybe I like it. Maybe I feel that my niche audience appreciates this thing more. I just think we gotta give people the freedom to do that. And I would never say that, Jeff or anybody was advocating that we have to censor these things. That wasn't his point at all. His point was on the consumer side. Let's not alienate people with things that are going to keep people from getting invested or interested in the thing. But I do think there is something of a slippery slope there that comes to interfering with the artistic process. I 100% believe in the idea of having little laboratories everywhere, right? Not people from above dictating what is acceptable. I'm for people doing whatever the fuck they want to do, and then us responding to that and saying, well, I like this, I don't like this, which to people's credit seems to be exactly what they're doing right now. But there's one little thing I don't seem to get. Anybody who's offended or turned off by the sexual violence in Goblin Slayer, who the fuck am I to judge that? I would never ever tell someone that they should just get over it, or they need to like this thing, or that they're wrong to feel the way they do. That is none of my fucking business. But when we're advocating for changing things that people make, that's when I get a little bit concerned. And let's get back to this whole two mindset thing. Because as I said, I think there's a camp here that's like, anime should be for everybody, let's not exclude anybody. But then there's people more like myself that grew up with anime as a weirdo, as a weird thing. I'm used to being ostracized for liking anime. So while that's definitely fostered a mindset of elitism in me and kind of a defense mechanism saying, well, fuck you guys, we don't want the normos here, this'll just be for us in the cool kids club. And yes, it's true, through these same processes, I am a little bit jaded. I can admit that. I'm used to seeing so much more fucked up shit than what happened in this manga, in this anime, that this shit just rolls off my back. And I totally see why there are tons of people who aren't gonna jive with this and aren't gonna want to be part of it. But when I think about an editor coming up to the guy who drew the fucking pictures in this manga and saying, listen, this shit right here, some people find it offensive, so we don't want that anymore. Maybe he's still allowed to do it, but then maybe his contract doesn't get renewed, maybe they bring in somebody else to do it. But this is a man's expression. I like this. I want to see him express himself. And yes, I'm happy to admit it. I do feel like they were intentionally going for sexual titillation here. Japan's a weird place. My mind just simply goes instantly to, well, why are you consuming this thing if you don't like it anymore, rather than, let's have these people change this thing. That's just where I come from. I understand it can be frustrating when you want to get into something, but something creates a wall that just stops you from enjoying it. I sympathize with that greatly. But when somebody makes a point that something like episode 1 of Goblin Slayer is objectively bad because it alienates some fans, I wonder what they believe the idea of media is. Because we might just have a definitional difference here. Is what makes a show good when it's the most accessible, when it's the most popular? Or perhaps what makes a show good is when it creates the most resonance with those who do enjoy it. Maybe there's a net total amount of enjoyment that's larger when it appeals to that niche rather than appeals mildly to everyone. I'm telling you right now, people, this scene, it doesn't turn me off from the show. It does horrify me. It does disgust me. It's just that I've seen way worse. As I always bring up, remember in Berserk, when there were literal demon baby farms turning pregnant women into demon baby factories and killing them afterward. It was every bit as graphic as what we've seen here. And the argument that there's some problem with not characterizing the characters enough in the anime, this I never understood. That in some way, this is what's making the sexual violence so much worse because it doesn't have a point. Why is there something special about this sexual violence that means you have to have these parameters in place before you're allowed to talk about it? Who made up that rule? If a writer just wants to have a character rape just for shock value, I don't understand why that isn't a perfectly valid reason. Are you not shocked? Is that not an effect one would want to create? And furthermore, there's a point being made in all of Goblin Slayer because did you notice? None of the characters have names. The priestess doesn't have a name. The guild girl doesn't have a name. The dwarf, lizard man, elf, none of them have names.
I heard some people talking, and I actually believed this for a time as well, that Goblin Slayer had the name Orkbolg, but that is in fact not true. Orkbolg is simply Elvish for Goblin Slayer, same way that his title in, common or English is Goblin Slayer, and the dwarves call him Beard Cutter. They're all just titles, not names.
So when the characters shown in episode 1 of Goblin Slayer are our cheap little party, the mage, the monk, and the fighter, when they all die, is it really so surprising that we haven't fully fleshed out their backstory? I agree that it was better in the manga and the light novel with the little bit of flashbacks we got for each of those characters. It helped flesh them out a little bit. But let's not forget, these characters, the point of them is that they are archetypes. Everything about the narrative is setting these characters up as faceless nobodies that are just going to be destroyed by the goblin hordes. They got cocky, they got carried away, they thought they could do more than they could do, and they're just another nameless bunch of corpses and or rape victims in the fucking pile. But you know what? There is nothing about Goblin Slayer that says that a rape victim will always stay a victim and that they will just be horrified by that trauma for the rest of their life. There is an empowerment that happens in the form of the fucking Sword Maiden that you would know if you kept watching the goddamn series. The Sword Maiden is a character who summons Goblin Slayer to kill goblins because she hears about him and his stories of being a passionate Goblin Slayer, because guess what? She was one of the legendary heroes that defeated the Demon Lord 10 years ago or whatever, and she was a rape victim of goblins as a child. She grew up, she overcame her trauma. I'm not downplaying it. I'm not saying it was easy, but I'm saying that Goblin Slayer is giving us hope in this objectively the most powerful character in the series is a rape victim. That is fucking empowerment. And while it's true that it looks like some characters have had their lives ruined, there is hope. They could become the next Sword Maiden. They don't have to let their trauma define them forever. This is why I was so frustrated with much of what I heard about the analysis of episode 1. Surprise, surprise, the series goes on to make better arguments.
And since I believe in steel, banning those who disagree with me and taking on the strongest version of their argument, let me add one small counterpoint. I've heard some people talking about how they believe that the Sword Maiden is just a big sex object, which she obviously is, and that her real role in the story is just to be sort of a trophy. Her traumatic history with the goblins and the fact that Goblin Slayer feels strongly about killing those things was obviously set up to give her positive feelings toward that character. I just don't think that in any way undercuts the point I just made. She's a victim who overcame her trauma, is one of the most powerful people in the world. What else is there to say?
And my final point that I want to make on the morality of Goblin Slayer is the one way that you can question Goblin Slayer's morality specifically. Some people talked about this. Goblin Slayer believes in killing all the fucking goblins. All of them. The children too. And as he's going to do so in episode 1, kill some fucking gob babies, the priestess says, "What if there's a good goblin?" To which Goblin Slayer responds, "The only good goblin is one who stays in his stinking fucking hole," and then he kills them. Look, it is objectively true that what he is doing could kill innocents. He is literally killing innocents, but he is doing it under the expectation that every goblin that has ever existed has been evil. Let's not forget, people, that there are racial alignments in Dungeons & Dragons, and guess what? Goblins are evil. And don't get me wrong, I'm actually on the side here of people criticizing Goblin Slayer. It is true, he is at a moral impasse. Every goblin he's ever met has been a literal murderer rapist, or at least a potential one. Every fiber of their being is programmed to grow up and be a murderer and a rapist. It's how they reproduce. They have very little choice. So yes, there could be a goblin who grows up, is a total freak, and realizes that his way of life is wrong, so he maybe runs away from the rest of his goblin kin, maybe he goes and lives with some human beings, just contributes to society for a while, and maybe even finds a woman who loves him unconditionally that he's able to reproduce with. Unlikely, as they have the minds of children, but it's possible. Goblin Slayer, however, has decided it is worth the risk to kill all the goblin children because GS has never met a goblin who's been anything but a murder machine. He's playing the odds, right? It's possible he's killing someone who could have grown up good. It's true, and he deserves to be criticized for it. This is dealt with in the series itself. I think the light novel covers this more. I haven't read it much, but I know that the man who taught Goblin Slayer how to survive, he himself was sort of hinted at to be a goblin, but turned out he's a Rhea. Rhea? I don't know how to pronounce it, but they're like the halflings of the Goblin Slayer world. But he was taught by this man, spare no goblin. There's never been a good one. There never will be a good one. I'm just taking him on his word. That's all we can do. There's really just one thing I want to say to sum up this point, and it's just this clip from Marge Simpson.
Call me a killjoy, but I think that because this is not to my taste, no one else should be able to enjoy it.
This is similar to the arguments I hear people making. And no, I don't want to straw man anyone. Nobody is saying shut it down, cancel it now, that I have heard. But can we just accept the fact that literally, it's different strokes for different folks. Some of us are more desensitized to violence and don't mind it. I just don't have the same kind of problem with an author deciding to insert some sexuality into a horrific event. It's a tradition that goes back in anime for a long fucking time. And frankly, if you like hentai, sexual violence is a staple of hentai. If we just take a quick trip to Hentai Haven. Christ. Looks like there's a pretty big rape tag here. Are we gonna need to shut these guys down? Is this not gonna be allowed anymore? Let's just keep in mind, people, that this is fantasy. It is not real. There is no victim. If you want to make some argument that this is making the world worse or that it's increasing victimhood somehow, please do so. But if your argument is simply that we're scaring off people who otherwise might enjoy this, I'm afraid I'm not sympathetic. I like niches. I value them because it's in these little pockets where we're separated that things can grow and thrive. And then they can produce something great from within that niche that maybe more people can enjoy. I believe in these little laboratories more than I believe in blanket making everybody the same. Should ultra-violent films not have ultra-violence unless it's making some grand point about violence? Why must we impose these rules on ourselves? Let's just enjoy the spice of fantasy.
Why the need for so much gruesome graphic violence? Why not let us imagine
Because it's so much fun, Jan. Get
Really?
it?
Oh, really? Okay, I'd like to see you walk down the street and get attacked by some kids who've just seen your
Oh,
movie.
but you thought, but see, Jan, you're all messed up
Okay.
because you're talking about real life.
Oh,
and
I
I'm
see.
talking
And kids
about
at
the
12,
movies. You gotta
kids
get
at
it
12.
straight. Now, if you want to talk about the movies, we'll talk about the movies.
Okay, and
If you
kids
want to
at
talk about
12
real
can
life,
tell
we'll
the
talk about real
difference.
life.
So in conclusion, remember people, your feelings are not objective. Something not having mass appeal doesn't necessarily make it bad, and just because you don't like something doesn't mean other people can't like it. And with that, let's close out the main section here of WIAGW. Christ, it's been a long time. I guess we better get to the mailbag already. People have been waiting a long time. So without further ado, let's go! Do you hear that? What is that? Goblin Slayer? Is that you? Ugh! Jesus Christ, worst guy, what the fuck?
Ever since that anime came out, Monday, slaying, Tuesday, slaying. It'll get in your bones. And now he's coming here.
So, what do I care? I like Goblin Slayer. And listen, if you're gonna give me a fucking lecture like everybody else about how the content is unacceptable in the show and that it needs to go away, I don't wanna fucking hear it, okay?
Shut up, you idiots. It's not about any of that. It's not about how the show propagates rape culture, and it's certainly not about the perceived anti-Semitism that I've chosen to read into the narrative. It's about something far more important. Demonetization!
Oh my god! There's one thing that unites us. Money!
Just this one time, we've got to team up and do something about this, man. My World of Warcraft girlfriend needs that fat loot!
You're right, he has to be fucking stopped.
Take it up for he's a fucking chance to pull one of his fucking little magic spells or whatever, okay? He's not gonna be able to take his 2-on-1. There's 2 fucking humans, there's one of him. He's never fucking overcome odds like that before, okay? So there's no way we're gonna lose now.
Hi, Goblin Slayer. Listen, buddy, can you turn down the music a little bit? It's making me a little bit anxious about our monetary situation with this episode. If you could just like back up and stop slaying goblins for 1 second, I think I'd really appreciate it. You're bringing a lot of violence to this situation.
Goblin Slayer